I think it's important to differentiate spiritual awakening from mental illness. Something I've been contemplating lately is that the ego creates mental illness. And what I mean by that is when we live from a place of identifying with our individual selves, like me, I, my kind of self-perception, then we're really personalizing our suffering, when suffering is a universal phenomenon, I guess, and we're really kind of unnecessarily isolating ourselves and sort of creating all these artificial defenses, and the ego's job is to sort of keep us safe, but when we identify with it, then we struggle with mental health issues like anxiety, depression, PTSD, all sorts of things that are, I think, kind of reflections of over-identifying with an ego state. So I suppose, according to that definition, most people I've observed are mentally ill in that they are trapped in their minds, and oblivious to the fact that they're actually spirit. And something interesting I learned recently, actually, from a meditation, is that the heart has this toroidal field, this energetic field that's been scientifically measured, that radiates beyond the body, and it looks very cool, like it's this big kind of double orb looking thing. And it was just inspiring because it's something that it's a kind of energy that I've felt more and more throughout my awakening process, like emanating from my heart. But it's always nice to know that it's, scientifically validated. As somebody who's studying mental health and social work, I'm realizing more and more how important it is to simply witness someone's relationship with their inner state without necessarily trying to intervene, because I think what we're doing as healers or space holders is teaching people to hold space for themselves, and whatever emotions, however ugly they are coming up, simply need to be held and understood so that they can be healed and transmuted. But that's ultimately something that only that person has the power to do. And the reason why we have to be careful not to intervene, but rather to guide, is that when there is attachment to fixing or to manipulating another person's outcome, it's likely because we have some unconscious wounding in this very same area. And so by fixing externally, we're hoping to sort of fix an internal wound. But that's not how we actually heal. We have to heal by letting go of that attachment and actually addressing our wound directly. Even if that's painful. As somebody who's also gone through mental health struggles and crises even in my life, I recognized that the colonial mental health system and medical systems did not recognize my mental health issues or crises as potential starting points for my spiritual awakening process. That was not an option to discuss. And I think that's very tragic because it took me a long time to come full circle and actually go through my awakening, because it was denied in many ways by systems that were extremely ill themselves, or created from thought forms that were very ill. Reflecting back on about a decade ago, when I first experienced altered states of consciousness, which was labeled as, psychosis and medicated heavily, and having also experienced these states using plant medicine, and also independent of that through my awakening process, through my dream work, through my healing process, just the gradual expansion of awareness and the process of reintegrating with, universal life force, whatever you want to call it, and just merging, made me realize that I was taking steps. My spirit was taking steps, but those were not recognized by the system as valid. There's a titration process in both healing and awakening, which kind of, to me, are like a DNA double helix. They happen simultaneously, because as we heal, we release trauma, and then we become closer to our true selves. And I think trauma can be initially quite a block to awakening, but in later stages can be a catalyst. And what I mean by that is, we are all traumatized. Birth is a trauma. Nobody has, I think 97% of families are dysfunctional, especially with the nuclear family system, which is a colonized form of, patriarchal conditioning that artificially separates us from community. So there's a lot of trauma wrapped up in that, obviously, not to mention all of the physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, spiritual abuse that occurs within those systems. And in addition, from institutions, schools, career, workplaces, social settings even, that are built on a traumatizing framework of colonialism, and separation of mind, body, spirit, racism, sexism, all of the isms, ableism, homophobia, xenophobia, political, religious extremism. These are all traumatizing forces that we accumulate throughout our lives. Even if you're a white-bodied person, you have internalized a lot of these harms, in that if you benefit from them, then you're actually benefiting from systems that harm other beings. And so that is an injustice that your soul registers as trauma, even if you're benefiting from it. And it's a misalignment with your true self, and so you're kind of living in this lie, even if you're kind of convinced by other people who are also living this lie. It's still something that your nervous system registers as a lie. And so this trauma accumulates. This trauma accumulates throughout our lives unless we process it and transmute that pain and that compounded energy into release and creativity and movement and freedom and liberation. So that's what I mean by trauma being, it can be a block or a catalyst, depending on whether the pain of your suffering at some point becomes greater than the pain of awakening from that suffering, awakening from your limited view of the world through ego and safety and survival and protection. When your pain of your, whether it's trauma or ignorance or dissatisfaction with your life, when that overbears the potential fear of growth and transformation, that's when you wake up, or you start that process of waking up. Maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's a death in the family or a close friend. Maybe it's a near-death experience. Maybe it's illness. Maybe it's any of those things or many other things. And your soul or your spirit just calls you home. And what's waiting for you beyond that door of uncertainty and fear is the greatest liberation you could ever imagine, the greatest freedom from self-doubt, attachment to objects, people, places, ideas, suffering, and ignorance that reminds you that you're whole, inherently whole without anything external. And that can be kind of a lonely or scary feeling at first. It was for me. I'm still learning how to really cherish my solitude. But the richness of the relationship that you develop with the rest of life is incomparable, and you actually learn how to love truly, meaning loving without attachment, without expectation, without any ulterior motives. Like, you're literally just loving everything, like trees, animals, other people, ideas, anything. Like, you can love anything in a pure way when you release those delusions. So yeah, it's definitely a process of maybe initially, going through the fears of having, a mental illness or experiencing the world differently than you're quote unquote supposed to. But because this universe is co-created, because humanity is co-created by other humans, what is normal can actually shift, right? And so when more of us wake up from a linear, egocentric worldview and embrace a holographic, multidimensional, quantum existence, then that actually becomes the norm. And so this process of recalibrating our nervous systems is a collective process. And I'm not saying that mental suffering and illnesses are not real. They are very real for the person that is experiencing them, especially, and also people that are impacted, but they come from the wrong perspective on mind and spirit. And so it is actually an opportunity when you are suffering in this way to recognize that your suffering is not personal, that you can wake up from that suffering and embrace a bigger world in which that suffering is not necessary. It's like the Buddha said, there is suffering, and the origin of suffering is attachment, and there is a way out of that attachment, and that's the Noble Eightfold Path. But there's many traditions that speak of this, letting go of our egos and our worldly desires. And it's often the opposite of what we think. Like, we think that holding on to something, holding on to our identities, holding on to our specific relationships, holding on to our property, our possessions, that makes us safe, but it actually quarantines us in our own prison, which to me is the most dangerous place to be in. When we are willfully allowing ourselves to be our own enemies and essentially like waging this internal battle against ourselves constantly, which takes up a lot of energy that could be used for greater purposes.